All right, hi everybody. Welcome back for everyone that was here this morning for our class about money. Now we're going to talk about some geography. I just have to tell you guys right off the bat, I love geography. I love maps. My wife would tell you, anybody I know would tell you that I really like maps. I collect some maps. I will spend a good chunk of time. If I have Google Maps open, I will like look over the map, trying to find interesting things that I haven't seen before. I just find the subject fascinating. So if you guys are here in this class today, I hope that you guys find it fascinating too. Hi, Evan. Evan's back. Hi, April. April says she loved the other class. Thank you, April. That means a lot to me. Hi, Tanisha. My name is Corey. So in the Q&A box, you can call me that. And yeah, that's my name. Tanisha, we're talking about the shape of the states today. And everybody else too, of course. So hi, everybody else. Hi, Gerard. Hi, April. April's asking, who is my wife? April, if you watched any of our classes in the spring, my wife is Becca. She was teaching the art history classes. So if you took any of the classes on prehistoric art or the Renaissance, she was the one doing all of those. We might be able to get her back at some point to teach some more. So hi, Jacob. Hi, Tarini. Hi, Ian. Hi, Mackenzie and Denali. Gerard says he loved learning about economics too. Awesome. That makes me feel really happy. Evan loved it too. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Arnav. Hi, Aubrey. Hey, everybody. We're going to have some fun talking about geography. I love it. You guys are already lots of comments, lots of communication. It's great. Okay, so I have the map of the United States behind me today as my, my background. I picked this one because, well, it might be a little bit hard to see, but down at the bottom, this map included Alaska and Hawaii down here. They're a little bit tough to see down in the corner. Up on the other side, we're going to talk a little bit about today briefly too, that people don't always know this, but the United States still has what are called territories. This box right here, you can see some of our island territories that they're not states, but they are part of the United States as well. They're not right here. They're not all right off the coast of Georgia and Florida, but that's where this map is putting them so that you can see them. They're actually further out in the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean. And I think later I can bring up a map that will show you where they are. But mostly what we're going to talk about is why are the states shaped the way they are? The United States is a little bit unique in that most countries have smaller sections, like subdivisions, or like smaller chunks of the country that are named and have maybe their own governments because it's easier to manage a country that way. The United States has hundreds of millions of people living here. If the government just had to handle all of that by itself, it would be really tough. If you were in our government class, forms of government class last week, we talked about the purpose of a government is to kind of make decisions for a group of people. In most democratic countries in modern day, people get to choose who goes to the government and who is going to be making those decisions. And if they don't like the decisions that are being made, at the next election, they can vote for new people to be in the government making those decisions. But each one of our states has its own government in addition to the government over the whole country. Since the beginning of the United States, each state has kind of tried to make decisions for itself in addition to making decisions as a whole, bigger, united country as well. And as the United States progressed and took over more land, that was one of the first things that we had to decide as a country was, how are we going to divide up that land? How, where will the borders be for each of these smaller chunks of the country? So we're going to talk about a little bit today how those decisions were made, why borders were put where they are. there's kind of a whole thought process behind it. We're kind of used to, at this point, the country just looking the way it does. But if we think about it a little bit, people, just like you and me, had to actually decide, where will the lines be? And these are important decisions too. If the line of a state is a little bit different, sometimes that might cut off a whole river that the other state was using. Or a line moved a little bit, might a city might change hands, like it used to be in one state or country, and now it's in a different one. Something interesting that if you spend some time looking at maps, you'll notice that what we usually think of as like the clean straight lines in some places aren't as clean or as straight as we thought they were. Just in my background, if you look, for example, the top part of the United States as you're going across, the top of Washington, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, they look like it's pretty much a straight line going across. But the top of Minnesota, for example, there's this little chunk that sticks up right here. If you've never noticed that before, it's a little bit weird that there's just a little boop up into Canada. There's other places around the country where if you zoom in and look closely, there are some strange lines in some parts. It's kind of almost like a fun scavenger hunt you can go on to look at the map of the states and see where some of the lines that you would think they would choose to do it more of like a straight, simple line, there's a much more complicated border. And we'll talk a little bit too about why some of those are the way they are. Okay, so let's jump into this. We're going to talk about the shapes of the states. Really quickly before we get into it more, I see some more questions or comments going in here. April says, I love those classes back in the spring. I will let her know. I will try to convince her to come back and do some more. Ryan is asking, Ryan, are you saying where's Miami? I think Miami is on the southeastern part of Florida. I don't know. Can you guys see my mouse cursor moving? Can you see the white arrow moving? If so, I have it right now on the southeastern part of Florida where I'm circling. That is where Miami is. Tanisha asks, do I have a green screen behind me? Yes, that's so that I can put things like a map up behind me so you guys can see it. We have a green screen. Tarini is asking, where is, I'm not sure exactly what word you're saying, Windsor? Is that the name of a city? Is it spelled a little bit differently? If you could check the spelling on that, I could help you locate where that is. Willow asks, what book do I have in front of me? I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but you're very observant. All right, great. So, yeah, so this is the United States. One of the first things that we notice if we look at the whole country and we look at how the state lines are organized, most people will notice that the east coast of the United States, look at the lines between like, and the shapes and the sizes. Up in the upper corner, look at like Vermont and New Hampshire, and the next to them is New York, way bigger. You have tiny little states like Rhode Island. They're in yellow in between Massachusetts and Connecticut. And then Pennsylvania is also giant. And then Delaware, really little, just kind of fit in there. The shape of Maryland is really weird if you look at it. It's like there's a chunk of it that's over in the ocean, and then it gets wide, and then it gets skinny, and then it gets a little bit wider again. But then if you compare these shapes to the Western United States, over here in the West, it looks like a bunch of boxes. You know, some of them are literally like rectangles, like Colorado and Wyoming. New Mexico is mostly rectangle with some little smaller rectangles sticking out. Even shapes like North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, they're kind of rectangular still. Even Oregon, my state, is kind of a rectangle with like little bits sticking out. Nevada, it's, you know, the top part is rectangular and it's got a triangle on the bottom. Utah is very rectangular. Before we go further, I just wanted to know if any of you can guess. Are there any guesses about why this is? why does the East Coast of the United States look like this? The shapes of the states. And the West Coast look like this. If you guys have any guesses, I would love to read them in the Q&A box. Evan asks, is Bermuda a USA island? I think so. I could look that up. But I think it is, maybe. I'll find out. And the Bahamas, we'll check on that too. Let me end my screen share here for a second. It's not on my list of territories over here. Well, I'll have to check that out for you guys. I'll find out. But yes, the question is Bermuda and the Bahamas. I think Bermuda is not. I think Bermuda, now I'm thinking about it, I think it might belong to England. You guys could check that out. If anybody wants to Google it, I always love it when you guys ask me questions I don't know the answer to. Because I love it. It's very, you guys are being curious, but you can actually help us out by, let's find out. Bermuda, I'm pretty sure it's part of England. The Bahamas, I'm pretty sure they're not. There are some islands in the Caribbean that are part of the United States, technically. The Bahamas, I'm pretty sure, are their own country. Gerard asks, where is DC? That's Washington, DC. If I go to a map of the whole country, again, you guys will have to tell me if you can see my cursor, the white arrow here. But Washington, DC is this little tiny, tiny chunk in between Virginia and Maryland, right there. Yeah, if I go to my East Coast map again. Yeah, do you guys see right here, in between Maryland, which is orange, and Virginia, which on this map is yellow, there's this tiny, tiny, tiny little shape in between them. You would almost be, I'd forgive you if you just thought that was just like a little bump in the border, but there's a little shape right there. Gerard, that is Washington, DC. And DC stands for District of Columbia. District basically just means an area that's been set aside. And that is where the capital of the United States is. A long time ago, when the country was being formed, the people that formed the country said, we want the national capital to not be a part of any state. If the capital of the country is like in Virginia or in New York, maybe that state will have too much control over it. So we're gonna set aside a piece of land and it will be the capital and it will not be a part of any state. Well, it was a good idea, but it has also created some problems. And we can talk about that a little bit later too. Tanisha asks, is Puerto Rico part of the United States? Yes, it is a territory of the United States. And territories, it's interesting because they're part of the United States, but they're not considered a state. So they get some of like the rights of being part of the United States, but they don't get all of the rights. Like for example, if you live in Puerto Rico, you're considered an American, but you don't get to vote for the president, for example. That is an interesting topic. There's been a lot of discussion in recent years about whether or not the United States should make more states. We've had 50 states for only, I believe, 60 years. The last state, Hawaii, was created about 60 years ago. And this is the longest period of our history without creating any new states. But the way the United States was designed, it was designed to kind of continue adding states as long as we wanted to. I have a little quote for you guys on that. This is from the Constitution of the United States. When the Constitution is like the founding document of our country. When you start a group, any kind of group, people will usually set down some rules. Though if you started a club, people might write up a document where they're like, what is our club going to be called? What are the rules? How do we bring new members into our club? If I'm going to have a chess club, I might make rules like we meet every Wednesday. If you don't show up for a few meetings, we kick you out. To be part of the club, you have to pay a membership fee. Every group is like this, or most formal groups are like this. So the Constitution is the founding document of our country. It kind of sets out the rules for how our country is going to work. Article 4, where it says like Article IV, that stands for 4 in Roman numerals. This is like the 4th section of our Constitution. And this is a little quote I pulled from it. It says, new states may be admitted, and admitted means brought into. New states may be admitted by the Congress, that's the part of our government that makes laws, into this union. So they said a few other things, but they left it at that. It's really funny because some of our founding documents, like the Constitution, they don't always go into a lot of detail. They keep it pretty simple. The part of our Constitution that talks about making new states is very short. It just says basically, Congress, the people in our government that make laws, if they vote on it, they can make a new state. And the new state should be a territory first, like down here, Puerto Rico in my background is a territory of the United States. And they have a few rules, like they're like, you shouldn't take a chunk of another state and make a new state. You shouldn't smush two states together unless the people that live there, their state government approves it. So like if North Dakota and South Dakota were like, what's all this North and South business? Let's just be Dakota. The people that lived in both of those states, their lawmakers could vote to just become Dakota and be one state. Not very likely to happen, but technically, legally, it's possible. Really quick, I'm gonna see, you guys, this is so great. You guys are asking so many awesome questions. Okay, so earlier, I asked, why does the East Coast states look like this while the West Coast states look like boxes? And here are some of your guys' guesses. Elizabeth says, because of the shape of the land. Yes, that is partially correct. That is part of it. Ryan says there's more space. Gerard says the West Coast looks kind of fat. April says, I have no idea. That's totally okay. That means you're ready to learn. Gerard says the East Coast looks skinny. Yeah, I can see that. Arnov says maybe to fit more states. I'm guessing you're saying the East Coast, they wanted to fit more states in. Gerard is pointing out that the small state is Rhode Island and the biggest is Alaska. You're totally right. Kaori says the East Coast is divided because people landed there first and did not have time to divide nicely. It's a question at the end. I think you're pretty close. Ananya says the people were really putting thought into the East Coast shape. And by the time they got to the West Coast, they probably got lazy and were just like, just make them boxes. And add a few squiggly lines here and there. You know, I think you're a little bit right there. Awesome. Yeah, some people are talking about where they're from, which states. I'm not going to share that information for everybody, but that's awesome. You guys are from a lot of different areas. It's very cool. Gerard says, yeah, Washington, D.C. Oh, in my background map right here on this side. You see this word? District of Columbia. It's got a little arrow going to right here. Yeah, that's helping point out where Washington, D.C. is. Great. So, yeah, so some of you guys that commented, I think you're pretty close. So the Constitution says that Congress, our lawmakers, can make new states. Well, the orange part here, yes, is the East Coast of the United States, and it is where people from Europe first landed when they came to the area that is now called the United States. Now, it's a pretty, when talking about like this part of history, it's a little bit complicated because it's still to this day, people are still discussing the fact that the first people that came to the United States, well, the first people in the United States, they already lived here for a very long time. the Native Americans that lived here for like thousands of years before anybody from Europe ever came here. And when people from Europe started arriving, it created a pretty complicated situation because people just started coming in and deciding to live here. And sometimes the Native Americans that lived there were okay with it. They were like, sure, you know, we'll trade with you. Wow, people are bringing in new technology. And they would, you know, trade, and sometimes it would be fair. But then sometimes they would bring in diseases, or they would take over land that the people that already lived there were not okay with it. And it created a lot of conflict and a lot of upset when basically territory that already had people living in it would be taken over by settlers from Europe that had more technology, better weapons, horses, etc. They would take areas by force. So that is something that we have to acknowledge, that it's kind of a complicated topic to talk about, that all of the parts of the United States that we know now were in many cases taken away by force. Sometimes there would be territories that the people that lived there would sign treaties or agreements, but a lot of the areas, there were no formal agreements made and they were just kind of taken. With that acknowledged, the first places that were made into states by European settlers are here on the East Coast. So the people that were coming into the coast, when they were dividing up like where our area of the coast will be, yeah, it was much smaller. You got you know, people were settling in places like what's now Connecticut, what's now Delaware, and you know, the people that lived there, it seemed like a pretty big chunk at the time. But now when we look at the entire map of what's now the United States, it doesn't look so big anymore. And the people that were British citizens at first that became Americans after the Revolutionary War, they were not the only people coming from Europe and trying to take over land. Up north, even after the United States was formed, people to the north that were from England were trying to take over as much land up the north in what is now Canada. People from Spain were trying to take over as much land as they could to the south in what is now Mexico. So in this map, you see here, the whole middle part of the country that has purple around it had been taken over by France. And France wasn't able to defend it. They weren't really able to do much with it. So in 1803, I believe, I think that's why it's labeled here, but around that time, they sold that whole chunk of the country, of the continent, to the United States. They said, you can have it, pay us some money, and now you're in charge of that whole area. Again, lots of people already lived there, but the European powers and the United States were trying to take over as much of this territory as they could. So France sold this whole chunk to the United States, and then the United States had to decide what to do with it. It's a huge chunk of territory, and it juts up against this part that's pink here that Spain controlled, and this part that is labeled Oregon country is much bigger than what Oregon is today. England was trying to control that area, and the United States was trying to control that area. So the United States is trying to press out from the East Coast towards the West Coast at the same time that Spain is like pressing north into this part of the country. England is like pressing south, and it created, you know, conflicts. But a lot of it was settled in meetings where people would actually like write down on paper and come to an agreement about where the borders would be. Like, where will the United States end? Where will the Spanish part of the country end? And sometimes they would pay each other, or they would just make agreements like, I will give you this territory if you give us this territory. And they came to agreements about which country would control which parts. Real quick, I'm just checking if, wow, I just want to let you guys know, you're asking a huge number of questions today, and I love it. I probably won't be able to get to every single question. I'll try to answer as many as I can. But yeah, so really quick on this part that we've been talking about, Ananya asks, and Aaron asks, why are there two Spains? Well, over here on the west part that says Spain, and over in what's now Florida where it says Spain, Those were just two areas that Spain controlled. It's not, they weren't calling those areas Spain. The map is just telling you Spain is the country that controlled each of those two different areas. And Gerard asks, why was that big chunk of land called the Louisiana Purchase? Well, that's just the name of, they were calling that the Louisiana Territory. I believe it was named after a king of England, King Louis. The way that you spelled that was L-O-U-I-S. So that territory named after the king, they called it Louisiana. And there's actually a lot of places in America that are just named after people like that. If we go back to our map of the United States, Pennsylvania was named after a person who, you know, the person's name was Penn. I think William Penn. You guys could Google that and correct me if I'm wrong. But a lot of these states originally were named after people or places in Europe. New York is named after a place in England called York. New Jersey, named after a place in England called Jersey. There's a lot of that. New Hampshire, etc. Over on the West Coast, New Mexico. Well, I think you can guess what that's named after. So the Louisiana Purchase in what's now Louisiana, the state, named after a king of France. Okay, so there's all these territories, they're being taken over or purchased by the United States, and then the country, the government, has to decide what to do with them. So this is what the country looks like now, but those borders, they were trying to come up with, as they pushed further and further west, they were trying to come up with like logical ideas of where the borders should be, like that made sense. And this is one of the ways that they decided. This is a map. If you saw our geography lesson about rivers, we looked at this map briefly, but these colors are trying to show all of the rivers of the United States and kind of where they flow. The different colors are kind of showing different major chunks of river systems. Like the purple rivers down here in the southeast part, they all flow towards like the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. All of these yellow rivers in the middle, they all flow eastward towards the Mississippi. All of the white ones up in the upper left-hand corner, they all flow towards the Columbia River that divides what is now Washington and Oregon. All of the red section here flow toward either the San Francisco Bay or to the Pacific. So one way that they decided was like a logical, makes sense way to divide things up was where rivers are. Rivers are big natural boundaries. The Mississippi River, the biggest river in the United States, is incredibly wide at points. It could be difficult to cross. So that seemed like a really good place to put a border between different states because it's a natural big line, right? Here again, this is just on the West Coast. Sometimes the river itself would be the border. Like you see the big white river here, the Columbia River, that forms a big chunk of the border between Washington and Oregon. But you'll also notice, if you see here how most of these rivers that are marked with white flow northward to the Columbia, whereas to the south, the red rivers here flow towards San Francisco Bay. Well, to put a line there, it was decided that this could make a pretty good boundary line. If they put the line there, the rivers to the north all flow up, the rivers to the south all flow down. They said, let's put the border there. And if you look on a modern map, right here where those river systems kind of separate, well, that's where the dividing line between Oregon and Idaho in the north and California, Nevada, and Utah in the south. I'll show you that one more time. Again, here's the dividing line between north of this line. The rivers tend to flow north and west to the Pacific. And south of this line, the rivers tend to flow south into the Pacific for the stuff that's now California. But this pink area, The rivers there tend to flow south and then stay there in Nevada. It's called the Great Basin. The water tends to just dry up in that area. It doesn't even go to the ocean. But that was like a logical place to make the dividing line. If, you know, people for hundreds and thousands of years have settled around rivers. So if you lived in Oregon, most of the rivers would all go north towards the Columbia. And if you lived in what's now California, the rivers would all be mostly taking you towards San Francisco Bay. So they said, and we still agree today, they're like, that's a good dividing line between those areas. Checking the Q&A box again. I love answering your guys' questions. Let's see what else we're asking there. Oh man, you have all asked so many questions today. It is awesome. I'm gonna try to hit as many of these questions as I can really quickly. Jacob asks, why is the ocean named Pacific? Pacific, I believe, means peaceful, and it was considered a more peaceful ocean. You could look that one up too, but I think the word Pacific goes back to the word peace. Yes, thank you. Tanisha verified that Bermuda is part of England or Great Britain. Thank you. Gerard asks, is Jamaica part of the United States? No, Jamaica is its own country. Gerard also asks, why are some states in Canada named funny names? Well, the people that lived in Canada, they got to name their own, what are called provinces. They don't call them states in Canada, but they're basically like Canadian states. They call them provinces, and they're often named after native words of the people that lived in that area, or they're named after, you know, things in their own history. Like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, each of those names for province has its own history and goes back to why people chose that. We don't always know the exact reason for every name. Like Oregon, for example, is a good example. If you research this issue, nobody can quite agree on where the word Oregon came from or what it even means. There's theories about it, but it's not as clear cut as say the state of Washington. It's named after George Washington. We know that. Oregon, why it's called that, nobody knows. It just is. There's some theories about it, but there's no like one right answer. Willow asks, why are the states different colors? They're not in real life. If you look at a map of the United States, it's just it looks green for where the forests are. It looks, you know, it'll look other colors where there's like farmland. And when we're looking at a map of the United States, though, we want to see where the borders are. In different states, they should look different on a map like this. So they just pick different colors so you can tell California is different from Oregon if we color them two different colors on this map. Let's see. Willow asks, where is Lincoln, Nebraska? Nebraska is in the middle of the country. It's right here. If you look up a map of Nebraska, you'll find Lincoln, Nebraska there. All right, so to get to our earlier question that we were talking about, why the states in the West Coast look different from the states in the East Coast. This is a picture of Thomas Jefferson. He was the third president of the United States, and he was the president in charge of the country when they made the Louisiana Purchase, when the United States took over that whole middle chunk of the country. It was Thomas Jefferson that sent out Lewis and Clark on a famous journey to explore that territory and try to find their way to the Pacific. We talked about that a little bit last week too. But Thomas Jefferson also researched the topic of how big should the states be? How should we divide them up? And one of the ideas that he came to what has to do with latitude and longitude. You may have heard these words before in geography lessons, but latitude are the lines that go left and right on the globe, and you use them to measure north and south from the equator. So like in this diagram, latitude lines go east and west, but just like rungs on a ladder, you use those lines to measure north and south. Longitude lines go up and down, and you use them to measure left and right, east and west on the globe or on a map. You can kind of think of, if you look at longitude over here on the right, think of a ruler. If you think of like a school, like classroom ruler, the lines on the ruler go up and down, but you use them to measure left and right on the ruler. The latitude lines, imagine you take your ruler and you turn it on its end. The lines would go left and right, but you would be using it to measure how tall something is. Well, it's the same thing on the globe. So we won't go into too much today what all these numbers mean, but I think it's enough for you to know that on a globe, we measure how many, like how far apart these lines are. And Thomas Jefferson, if you look at like over here on the left upper side, you see North America with the United States in the middle. And you see these numbers here, like 75, 90, 105, 120. These numbers are basically just measuring how far apart these lines are on the globe. These are made up lines that we use our imagination. They don't exist. If you walk outside, you will not see a real line on the ground, of course. But it's a way of measuring how far apart things are, how big things are on the globe. And Thomas Jefferson said that the states, while on the East Coast, they kind of just got divided up based on who got there first and how much land they wanted to take over. For the Western United States, they actually had the idea that they should try to make the states all sort of be equal sizes as much as possible. And they would use those latitude and longitude lines to do it. So that's why a lot of states like Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota all have a very similar amount of area, amount of shape. They were trying to make them all about the same number of latitude lines and longitude lines. If you look at, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, etc. Again, they're trying to make these states about the same size, and they would use those latitude and longitude lines to come up with roughly where they should be. If you look at it, there's just lots of kind of straight lines across these states. The line between Oregon and Washington kind of continues over here between North Dakota and South Dakota. The line up and down, there's kind of a line that goes down the left-hand side of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas to Texas. It goes back and forth a little bit, but it's roughly there. The line between Oregon and California, Nevada, Idaho, it extends for a ways. So there's a lot of these kind of grid lines when you look at the western part of the United States, because they were actively trying to make the states, as they moved westward, they were trying to make them as equal as they could. Now, some of the states, you'll notice like Texas is way bigger. California is a lot bigger than other states. I looked into this. I looked this up. Apparently, Texas and California, for example, are a little bit different, because Texas at one time, believe it or not, for I think 9 years, was its own country. The people that lived there, they actually declared independence from Spain, who controlled Mexico. And they said, we're going to be our own country. That lasted for about 9 years. And then they were like, okay, let's become part of the United States. But they were already a massive, amount of area compared to the other states around them. California, apparently, when it was going to become a state, it was so far away from, like the capital of the United States is all the way over here on the East Coast. Our capital almost can't get any closer to the Atlantic Ocean, but California was way over here on the West Coast. And when it was first formed, it was difficult to get there. It was very far away from everything else. And California kind of set its own borders a little bit. And it was a little bit like, what are you going to do about it, government? We're going to have a big state with big borders, and everybody else is kind of like too far away to argue about it. That's the simplest version of the story that I found, and I thought that was interesting. They also, lots of gold was found in California, and they wanted to basically have their borders include all of that area where the gold was found. They didn't want any other state to really be able to control that area. So the gold fields of California go up pretty far north and way down through the mountains, like along their border, and their state lines control that whole area. So a lot of reasons for why the borders were put where they were. But sometimes it was like the area that they were trying to control. Sometimes, like between Oregon and California, it has to do with where the rivers are. There could be a lot of reasons. Oh, Tanisha looked up Pennsylvania, and it is named after William Penn. And the last part of the word Sylvania comes from a word for woods. So it's kind of like William Penn's forest. That's a fun derivation of that one. Excuse me. Oh, and Willow looked up, yes, Louisiana was named after King Louis XIV, one of the kings of France. So awesome. Thank you guys for helping me confirm that. All right, so we only have a few minutes left. I think we have time to talk about a little bit more. Talk about those grid lines. Yeah, so again, I just wanted to zoom in on Rhode Island here a little bit. It's our smallest current state. It originally was just this little island down here, the little island that has, you see the city of Newport and Portsmouth on there. That was the original Rhode Island. It was actually an island, and that was the whole territory. But over time, they bought more land. They kind of traded some land with the territories around them, and they made their territory bigger. So Rhode Island was originally an island, and they just kind of kept on pushing out their borders till their borders are where they are today. And it's still kind of a funny name when you're on the main part of the country and you say we live in Rhode Island. I remember as a kid being like, but it's not an island, you know. Well, it used to be. And one more time, because we were talking about rivers a little bit briefly, the border between here, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, it's kind of a squiggly line that goes north to south. It's not a straight line like in the West. Well, again, that line is the Mississippi River. Whereas the line between Kentucky, look at the north part of Kentucky. Is that not the squiggliest line you've ever seen? The border between Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio? Well, that's the Missouri River. That is the natural border between those areas. That's a river just flowing back and forth. They decided that is where the border between the states should be. So a lot of these states that have these very squiggly borders, that's why. Just really fast, because I think we have some students that live in Florida. I thought we could talk about real briefly. I thought this one might be fun for you guys. Most of the state, of course, they decided that this was a territory that was kind of taken over from Spain. And it's this peninsula that sticks out into the ocean. And they decided that most of that should be its own state. But you'll notice, like up here at the north part of the state, next to the counties of Nassau and Baker, where it hits up with Georgia, the border gets really weird. Well, that's because there's a river there that's part of the border, and there's a swamp right there too. And they decided they were trying to make the lines kind of go with the river and like around a swamp there. Sometimes when you get these funny little bits that stick out from a state, it's often because they were trying to go around something, or they were trying to include something and not have it be left out of one state or the other. Again, this giant map of California, part of it had to do, again, with the gold fields of California in the mountains on the east part of the state. But there was also several on the west coast of the state where it hits up against the ocean. In San Francisco, in the middle, north part of the state, and San Diego in the south, there were some really good ports there. Deep water ports where big ships could go in and dock. When they were forming their borders, they definitely wanted those to be part of their state. They wanted to control them. And that's part of why the southern border ends right after San Diego, is they were like, we definitely want San Diego to be part of the state. in the north, they kind of just kept on going to where, again, we talked about earlier, where those rivers all flow south. They were like, okay, let's end the state there. So I hope that was interesting to you guys. We're pretty much out of time. I got this book and I wanted to show it to you all. It's called How the States Got Their Shapes. Some of the information I talked about today, I found in this book. You can get this on Amazon. If you find this subject really interesting, I just wanted to show it to you. It's got lots of information. It goes state by state. And if you've ever wondered about why your state looks odd or looks the way it does, they go state by state. Here's Delaware. Delaware has a weird semicircle at the top. Why is it like that? Well, you can check this book out and it'll tell you. So I just wanted to show that to you before we end it off today. Thank you guys for watching. I know I was not able to answer every question, but I love your questions. Maybe we can talk more about geography on this topic in the future and be able to answer more of your questions. So thank you guys for watching. Bye to everybody. This afternoon, Dylan is doing video game coding. We have more great classes for you tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up yet, you can go to delphian.org to our webinar page and sign up for more. We would love to see you guys at the rest of our classes this week. So bye to everybody. Saying bye in the Q&A box. Bye Jacob, bye Ryan, bye Ian, bye Willow, bye everybody. All right, we will see you next time.